Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is the first single-player Star Wars game for over 10 years, but is that enough to make it a good game? If you're looking for a solid action game which accurately captures the sense of adventure and sci-fi fantasy of one of the most iconic franchises in the world, then you're in luck.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
However, if you're looking for innovative gameplay mechanics and features, well...
You're on the planet that is farthest from.
Jedi Fallen Order is a third-person action game developed by Respawn Entertainment, the minds behind the first-person shooter franchises like Titanfall and Apex Legends, published by EA, the closest real-world analogue for the Empire. Coming from an FPS background, it's not at all surprising that Respawn aped every major third-person design feature that has spawned in the absence of single-player Star Wars games. We've got a Souls-like approach to saving and checkpointing with very Sekiro-esque combat, platforming and climbing ripped straight from Uncharted, puzzle tombs you'd expect to find in the most recent Tomb Raider games, and of course the games industry's favourite buzzword these days, Metroidvania-style level design. In Jedi Fallen Order, you take control of Cal Kestis, played by Gotham's Cameron Monaghan. Cal was a young Jedi Padawan during the Great Jedi Purge on the order of Chancellor Palpatine, now the self-proclaimed Emperor of the Galaxy. He is forced into hiding and has suppressed his Jedi abilities through fear of being discovered. That's until an accident forces his hand and exposes him to the Empire. Cal escapes the malevolent Imperial Inquisitors on his tail with the help of former Jedi Seer Junda and pilot of the Stinger Mantis starship, Grease, and sets off on a journey to rebuild the Jedi Order and overthrow the Empire. Throughout his adventure, he learns new abilities and force techniques, which is where the Metroidvania elements come in. The game world is split up between multiple planets which you will explore and return to repeatedly with more skills to access new areas. Unfortunately, the fundamental flaw with Metroidvania level design is that the player is often forced to backtrack through old areas. This is frustrating to the point where I wished Fallen Order had copied Uncharted 4's wide linear level design as well as its platforming. The opening and closing levels of the game are where Fallen Order is at its strongest, because the game funnels you in a specific direction with impressive set pieces, which stops the Metroidvania design choices from getting in the way of the great story. The weakness of such level design isn't exactly softened by how similar all of the planets feel. They all look fairly different, with the scorched and arid Dathomir being totally different from the lush and green Kashyyyk, but they all feel the same to traverse. Every planet seems to be composed of high cliffs, with sharp sheer drops into ever-deepening chasms, with a few janky sliding sections and even jankier rope swings. Seriously, Luke managed to swing across a gap under fire while holding Leia, but this kid can't catch a rope, literally, to save his life. An argument could be made that fast traveling for a Jedi would be impossible since they don't actually have this ability, but the game never justifies some other mechanical choices which don't make sense within Star Wars canon, so I feel like a fast travel ability at least back to the ship would save the player a lot of time. I am of course referring to the game's Souls-like tendencies and respawning enemies. Fallen Order spreads checkpoints thinly to add a sense of challenge and greater risk to combat encounters, and when the player meditates at these checkpoints, all enemies are respawned. This is never justified in the story, which is a forgivable gripe, but is at odds with narrative immersion. And sometimes enemies respawn entirely independently anyway without even meditating. That is just one of many glitches and performance issues that this game launched with, no doubt in an attempt to capitalize on the release of Rise of Skywalker. As a personal preference, I don't particularly like Dark Souls elements, but something this game took from Souls that I did like is the combat. While the lightsaber still doesn't manage to feel like much more than a big glow stick due to Disney mandating no dismemberment of humans, the combat is pretty satisfying. The game's swordplay is absolutely at its best in some of the boss encounters, particularly those against the Inquisitors, the Second Sister and Ninth Sister. These moments feel like proper Star Wars duels with a sense of rhythm and give and take when it comes to attacking and blocking. Taking on basic stormtroopers makes the famously elegant weapon feel like it should, but as soon as some ugly rat creature takes 2 or 3 hits to die, the consistency is shaken loose. The punishing difficulty of Dark Souls is mercifully absent, though that extra level of digital suicide is available in the multiple difficulty options if you want to subject yourself to such torment. However, there are times when combat becomes frustratingly unbalanced. These moments are troublesome in the early stages because the game doesn't give you the necessary tools to fight so many enemies up close and at range, so it feels like banging your head against a wall like you're missing something, and it's because you are. Enemies hiding behind walls to pop out at you isn't challenging or clever level design, it's just cheap and annoying like jump scares in bad horror films. Now for a mild spoiler alert, even though it was spoiled in the the game's own marketing, combat only gets better as Cal unlocks new lightsaber techniques, which massively boosts his existing repertoire of skills. Fallen Order allows you to go into incredible detail in how to customize your lightsaber and make it exactly how you want it. The saber is split into multiple sections, all of which can be customized, and of course the blade color itself can be changed. While this is undeniably one of the game's biggest selling points, it does contradict with some narrative beats further down the line in the story and could have been delayed to have a bit more impact. But it is difficult to deny how much making your own lightsaber takes you back to those childhood days of wishing you could be a Jedi. The appearance of Cal, the Stinger Mantis ship, and your companion droid BD-1 can also be customized, but none of this is anywhere near as in-depth or satisfying as with the lightsaber. Unless, of course, your sense of fashion is defined by owning over 20 ponchos. While the lightsaber customization is a real treat for any Star Wars fan, the Force powers are fairly limited and your acquisition of them is stretched. Cal begins with Force Slow, an ability similar to what Kylo Ren uses in The Force Awakens, but over time the player will unlock Force Push, then bizarrely later on Force Pull, and a double jump. The double jump in particular feels like it should have been one of the first abilities Cal learns, and the fact that it takes so long just seems contrived and makes some of the platforming sections even more painful. Did he just forget that he can do a flip? Justification for Cal's lack of powers at the start is because of his PTSD following the Jedi Purge and the death of his master. This is a very dark topic and one rife with storytelling possibilities, but the game only scratches the surface of this potential. The overall story here is classic Star Wars in some of the best ways, but can at times feel too familiar, with all major reveals being too obvious to even a non-Star Wars fan. But that doesn't stop the characters from being lovable and intriguing. Cal himself is tormented by what he believes to be his past failures, but is unfortunately one of the weaker characters. Seer, on the other hand, wrestles with her identity as a Jedi and the role the dark side played in her life, which makes her one of the most interesting characters, albeit with an arc we may have seen before. We don't see much of Grease beyond him being the lovable rogue Han Solo type that flies the ship, but he's still a delight whenever he's on screen. And of course, who could forget BD-1, Cal's personal Swiss Army droid and current cutest droid in the whole galaxy. A personal standout for me is the villainous Imperial Inquisitor, the Second Sister, who brings a sinister and threatening gravitas dominating every scene she's in. It's a shame we don't see much of the Second Sister, but this limited screen time mimics that of Vader in the original movie and serves to make her even more intimidating. The story takes these characters on a journey that may be predictable, but it's refreshing to see something so unapologetically Star Wars. We've got the wild western and dirty underbelly of Star Wars covered with the Mandalorian TV show. Now Fallen Order captures the elements of traditional fantasy and mysticism that separated the franchise from its contemporaries. While much of the game treads familiar territory in terms of storytelling, there are plenty of references and callbacks to all eras of Star Wars, each of which feels perfectly at home. The player is never dragged out of the moment by the game screaming, "Hey, look at this minor detail from Clone Wars, aren't we clever?" Instead, it just lets them be so that if you overlook them, you're not missing out, but you'll get a nice dose of fan service if you know what you're looking for. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is easily the best Star Wars game in years, even if that's just because pickings have been pretty slim. It captures exactly what Star Wars should feel like in its fantastical story with a blend of darkness and whimsy. Fallen Order is great Star Wars, however, due to some of its design choices and numerous glitches and performance issues, that's not enough to call it a great game. All of its reappropriated features have been done better elsewhere and fairly recently. It copied much but perfected little, leaving a game that could have been so much more and, at times, almost achieved those lofty ambitions. With some fine-tuning and reassessment of some fundamental design flaws, the future of the franchise and Star Wars games in general certainly could be a bright one.
What is it they've sent us?
Hope.
Anyway, that's just what I think about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Make sure you let me know what you think down in those comments below. Do you like the influences of Uncharted and Dark Souls, or is this just another clone knockoff? Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe if you want to see more, and head over to patreon.com/prettygoodgaming to support the content we create. I've been Henry, this has been my review of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I apologise for my croaky voice, I feel very unwell. I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.
You are not approved trash.
And trash, just not approved trash.